The fall of the monarch ends good leadership in Africa. Are you ready to delve into the impact of our actions on future generations? Join us as we explore the untapped potential of African nations and the crucial role of strong leadership in realizing their greatness. Discover the fascinating history of these countries and learn from their past mistakes. Because when one nation rises to success, it inspires others to do the same. Hi, welcome to Fourth Arm, and don't miss this eye-opening journey of how the fall of the monarch brings an end to good leadership in Africa. African leaders seem to think they're the only ones for the job, even when the weight of leadership becomes too much to bear. They're blind to their own failures and mistakes and believe no one else could do better. But it's time for these leaders to wake up and face reality. Stepping down doesn't mean defeat, it's a step towards progress. This kind of forward-thinking mindset was common in the great empires of Africa before imperialism took hold and stifled their ideas and innovations. The Oba in the Yoruba kingdom, a revered figure, couldn't be as autocratic as he might have wished, and if his administration is unproductive or went beyond his bounds to commit an abomination, or flout the laid-down traditional controlling mechanism of the society, he must abdicate, go on exile, or commit suicide, depending on the gravity of his misdeed. The monarchical system among the Yoruba is very democratic. The Oba is not above the law, and his power is limited by a council of chiefs. The system of government introduced to Africa during colonization is the main cause of the destruction of selfless leadership role in Africa. Have you ever wondered how two great empires on separate continents and speaking different languages could have the exact same system of governance, ruled by dynasties of kings and queens, passed down through hereditary succession? It's mind-boggling, isn't it? These monarchs held complete authority over their people, wielding power as the supreme political, judicial, economic, military, and spiritual leaders, and using their military might to expand their territories. But what happens when one empire becomes subservient to another? This leads to a stagnancy that can last for generations, affecting the economy, society, and politics. In this video, we'll take a deep dive into how this all played out and the mystery behind these two empires and their similarities. The Great Oyo Empire. The Oyo Empire was a Yoruba kingdom in Western Africa that flourished from the 13th to 19th centuries. It became the largest Yoruba state thanks to its administrative and organizational skills, trade wealth, and powerful military. With over 500,000 soldiers, the Oyo Empire was well protected. It was also one of the first empires in the world to have an electorate system of government, complete with arms of government such as the head of administration, Alafin, legislative, Oyomesi, judiciary, Ogboni, and military, Esho, headed by the Omakekanfo. The Oyo Empire was inclusive, with seats for women, Ayalode, youth, and slaves. Yet Ayalode's seat was reserved for a woman representative, and no man was allowed to represent women's affairs. This was far ahead of Europe and America, who only allowed women and descendants of slaves into their democratic systems in the 20th century. The once powerful Yoruba kingdom was taken over by the British Empire and merged with others to form Nigeria in 1914, despite their strength, influence, and education. Today, the Yoruba presence extends across West Africa and is a cultural force globally, with millions of descendants in the Americas. The impact of Yoruba culture can still be seen in masquerade carnivals, dress, language, religion, songs, dances, and the king and council of chiefs outside the continent. Of all African cultures and ethnic groups brought to the Americas during slavery, only Yoruba culture remains most visible to this day. The Great British Empire. The UK government is known as His Majesty's Government, with the British monarchy serving as the head of state and head of the British Armed Forces. The monarchy performs official, ceremonial, diplomatic, and representational duties. As a constitutional monarchy, the monarch appoints and dismisses the prime minister and can comment on draft laws, but must ultimately accept the decisions of the prime minister and cabinet. The monarch holds weekly confidential meetings with the prime minister, but it is the prime minister who holds the control. The monarchy has three constitutional rights: the right to be consulted, the right to encourage, and the right to warn. Sadly, Africa's monarchs are no longer respected in politics and economics. They only lead traditional ceremonies and have no power over the state. They could even be dethroned by politicians, unlike the British king, who remains in power and can't be dethroned. Colonialists brought in political institutions to dominate the traditional monarchs, putting them on the government's payroll and taking away their ability to challenge the political class. Obas, Ezes, Olas, sultans, and emirs are now controlled by politicians. The monarchy still reigns supreme in the United Kingdom's political system. Meanwhile, in Africa, the colonial powers dismantled the traditional monarchies and placed them under the control of the political class. Could this be the root cause of Africa's ongoing struggles with poor governance? Remember this infamous phrase, "They came only to steal, kill, and destroy." The colonial powers stole precious cultural artifacts, killed African leaders and citizens, and destroyed Africa's ancient democratic systems, including its monarchies. All the while, they extracted the continent's resources to fuel their war efforts, with no recognition or compensation given. It's a dark chapter in history, but one that must not be forgotten. Throughout the 16th century, it was fashionable for Europeans to venture around the world in search of goods they could bring back home. The sojourn brought them to the people of Africa, a people full of strength and love, who, despite seeing the European very strange, still welcomed them into their communities because the culture and tradition of Africa has to do with respect and love. The relationship between African kings and European merchants was positive until the 1800s, when Europeans changed their approach. They tricked African leaders into accepting foreign laws and took control of their lands. In the late 1800s, European countries competed for African land, seizing control of kingdoms and building empires. They came as explorers and traders, but were actually deceptive. This negative experience reinforced negative stereotypes and led to the loss of African language, culture, history, and governance. Why our kings lost their sovereignty? Africans' pain is Europeans' prosperity. The encounter between the Europeans and the indigenes reveals who truly the Europeans are. The African people, full of strength and love, has become weak and full of hate. The British deception changed every system into their favor. The colonialists experienced stiff opposition across Africa from all monarchs who loved their people and fought against the atrocities of the imperialists. In order to suppress future opposition, the British weakened the power and authority of the African monarch. They introduce a system of government that gives authority to those without governance skills who will serve their interest and ensure different ethnic groups don't trust each other. Divide and rule contraption was inserted in their system of governance. Not a single country is in the leagues of developed nations in Africa, simply because of the way the colonialists left Africa. There were some brave individuals of the African monarchs who stood up against the British colonization. Number one was Oba Ramwem of Benin. He fought fiercely against the British, but unfortunately he was betrayed and his people were massacred. The British carted away thousands of cultural artifacts from the great Benin Empire. Next up was King Dosunmu of Lagos. He was forced to sign away his kingdom despite the strong relationship he and his father had with the British. The British introduced cannons and reduced Lagos' population from 22,000 to 5,000. Another one was Jaja of Opobo. He was lied to and eventually killed in exile, with his kingdom and trade being taken over. Lastly, Saradana of Sokoto Adakiru. He was betrayed and killed. Despite leading an 18,000-strong army, the British defeated him with their Maxim guns and displayed his beheaded photographs to intimidate other monarchs. Sadly, despite all the killings and atrocities committed during colonization, the British were honored, and no officer was ever punished for their actions. This is the painful truth about how the African kings lost their sovereignty to the Europeans. Is the political class a destructive or progressive institution on African continent? Has the introduction of the three arms of government improved or destroyed African society? Is the continent better off economically, socially, morally, financially, culturally, and administratively? Is it ideal to condemn the African culture, language, or system of government that was not studied or understood by the imperialist? Is it African political class that modify the colonial system to their advantage? Why did the new system of government fail in Africa but succeed in Western countries? Do Africans need to practice the system introduced or modify what is practicable? We need to ask all of these questions. As we come to the end of this video journey, let's reflect on the current state of the government. It's clear that the colonialist system has not worked for Africa. The leaders are not held accountable and they cling to power even when they fail to improve lives. It's time for a change. We need a new force to complete the arms of government. The new arms will henceforth be the fourth arm. But the change must come from within too. We must work towards breaking down the barriers that divide us and embrace diversity. Let's work together towards a future where our leaders serve with integrity and where we, the people, are truly in control. Get ready for an enlightening experience with our upcoming video, the introduction of the fourth armed system of government. It's a must-watch filled with fascinating insights. Don't miss it, and don't forget to subscribe.